Hello, my name is Brian, or if you would like, you can refer to my alias, the Smaltzy Cynic. Today I'm going to be proposing why I am not worried for the future of single-player games. Now before we get into the content itself, I do want to establish what sort of setup this opinion format is. Now these things are going to be loosely based on a couple of sources or information that I think is relevant to the topic. I won't be going into full details on each source, but I will provide them so that if you are interested in a certain aspect, you can at least read about or listen to something more substantial. For the record, on this specific topic, I am not a fan of multiplayer-only games. And in fact, many of these games that I am referencing, I have not played myself. I prefer single-player experiences or small group multiplayer games that are more cooperative than competitive, such as Left 4 Dead or Payday 2. But I think this video will be useful even if I'm not part of the demographic, because I think it will highlight some of the benefits that may come from more multiplayer-only games, but mainly it will talk about what are the problems associated with the idea. So the first major hurdle I have with the idea of multiplayer-only games is that there's a demand that you immediately play them. Now this isn't just a personal taste or a personal bias against multiplayer games. This is how they are established because the way they are designed is they build pre-order hype, especially from AAA games, to establish a consumer base at the very start of the game. And the reason for that establishment of a consumer base is because it incentivizes other people to play it. If there is no player base there, the game is dead on arrival, which is a greater problem for indie developers because they lack the brand name recognition as well as the marketing budget of, say, Gearbox or 2K Games. And this problem isn't just for releases, because content updates, subscription models, microtransactions, whether they be cosmetic or character class specific or something gameplay related, these are all incentives to keep you hostage to your games because they want to retain you as a consumer of the game. And when you put any time and especially money into a particular game, you will have less of a reason to want to move away from it. This is why I find multiplayer-only games are not as sustainable as single-player games or even games that have both single-player and multiplayer components, because there is this unreliable nature to your purchase. You don't know whether or not the game will be broken at release or have any problems that you weren't aware of, or you won't even be aware if the player base will be active in the next 3 or 4 months. And also, you will be less likely to buy one of these games on an impulse when it comes on sale because you're not allowed to enjoy it at your own leisure. This is why I find that news coverage worrying about the future of single-player-only experiences are misplaced. Because of the unsustainable nature of multiplayer-only games, the more that come out, the less that the player base can go around to occupy those games. It's a simple case of supply and demand. This is why in the grand total of all multiplayer-only games in the past, only a few have been successful, like Team Fortress 2, League of Legends, Dota 2, and not the many clones of those games. It's just a market that cannot sustain a oversaturation of the same product. In order to illustrate my point about the unsustainable nature of these types of games, I want to provide a general trend of what happens to these types of games, as well as showing the raw data of various multiplayer-only games, as well as games like Call of Duty, which provide a single-player and a multiplayer experience, but focus exclusively on their multiplayer aspects to showcase their similarities. Now, the diagram I have in front of me is a crude illustration of what sort of trend we should expect from these types of games. Now, there will always be outliers, whether they be just games that people can't get enough of, or games such as Evolve Stage 2 Beta, which encourages a more healthy consumer base by changing its core design. Now, what my illustration is basically proposing is the life of a multiplayer-only game is its inception before release. The pre-orders and the marketing budget is what generates the long-lasting consumer base from the beginning. And what inevitably happens is that the initial players leave the game, whether it's because there's not enough content to sustain their interest, such as The Division, or maybe the gameplay isn't as interesting as they had hoped to be, such as Evolve. But what happens to the game is it goes into this somewhat sustainable place where maybe there's a couple dedicated 100 to 1,000 players who keep the game alive, but also raise the skill barrier because they have played the game for so long that they have a greater understanding of what to do than someone who just gets into the game. It's a catch-22 kind of situation where you want to preserve the player base from the outset to keep the game active. But at the same time, you don't want the game to become too complicated that discourages any new fodder to join. There are various solutions that could fix this problem, such as having gameplay that is both simple yet very complicated to understand, which helps players get into the game and have something to interest them the further they play. Another solution is to develop a healthy community around a game and nurture that to encourage more people to play it. A third and often forgotten solution to this problem is to include a bot match system into the game, which is unlikely because there's no real incentive for developers to make these modes if games have internet access so freely available, which you can learn a little bit more about from Super Bunny Hop's video. These are only temporary possible solutions for the dilemma of maintaining a skilled player base versus the number of players. And that is the crux of multiplayer-only games, but I also think it could be a blessing in disguise because the worry for having a healthy consumer base encourages more cross-play multi-platform games, as well as companies being more innovative with their price models, as well as general strategies for these types of games. Now, these proposed benefits I've suggested are not just abstract possibilities. We've seen games move away from map pack and other non-cosmetic gating of content, which subdivides the community into smaller and smaller groups. And we've seen games such as Rocket League embrace the cross-compatibility for consoles, which helps mitigate that problem of having a lower consumer base on one platform versus another. And I think this would only come about if we had these surplus of multiplayer-only games. So I think that this trend is actually a good thing. On the other hand, this trend also is the result of why many multiplayer-only games have one or two developed modes when they could offer so much more found in other multiplayer single-player bundles. And I don't think there's any real solution to this problem because, as we found in Battlefront, when you offer too many game modes, the unpopular ones become devoid of any players. And because more time could be spent on the popular modes, that could lead to a better game. So while building a game around one or two game modes could make the game too samey or repetitive, or make the gamer feel like he didn't get his money's worth of the purchase, I think this format is more acceptable for multiplayer-only games where they design themselves around one or two game modes that really excel in the experience they want to create. And if publishers are more flexible with their price models for their game, I think even with the invasive microtransactions into AAA games, these games have their place and they deserve to be played. But to return to my original point about why I am not worried for the future of single-player-only games, it's simply this. It's the future the multiplayer-only games have to worry about. Thank you for coming to the end of the video. I appreciate that you took the time to listen, and if you have any feedback on what you found interesting, or maybe something you learned, or maybe some counter-argument you would have for my points, I'd love to hear it. And if you have any suggestions on any future opinion pieces I can make, I'll gladly accept them, as I have a couple ideas already planned ahead, but I'll gladly accept any more. And this opinion piece was all improv on my part with a few bulletin points, which is different from my Bioshock review that I did the other day. So if you would give me some feedback on maybe how well this turned out, I'd gladly accept it because I'm really just winging it right now. But anyways, thank you for listening and have a good day.